I'm going to jump into the LinkedIn tips portion of this talk now. So I'm going to share my screen. And let's see. I'm just going to get a thumbs up from Claudia when she can see it. Can you see my screen now, Claudia? Amazing. And so what you're looking at is my LinkedIn profile. I will put it into the chat as well. And we'll start with our first tip in terms of how to use LinkedIn. And that is, feel free to connect with me. But when you do so, make sure that you customize your connection request. So if I go to somebody else's profile here, let's just go onto LinkedIn. And I go to connect with them. The easiest way to connect with them, of course, is just to hit the button connect. But every time you do that, it's going to prompt you. Let's find somebody I don't know. It's always a challenge when you spend too much time on LinkedIn.
Jake, why don't you add me?
Sounds great.
Yes, F-A-Y-E. Yes, F-A-Y-E.
Yeah.
Space S-H-E-N.
Yeah.
Let's see. Yes, the third one.
Third one. Thank you, Faye.
Yes.
Yeah, the one that works for Lexis. Thank you. And so instead, if I click here, it prompts me to add a note every time you want to add this note. And on a mobile device, it won't necessarily prompt you to do this. So you have to go to personalized connection request. I would always do that. And specifically I'm going to tell Faye, hi, Faye, thanks for hosting me today. That way I know, or she knows, I should say, that I met her in this context. I get a lot of connection requests. And so it's really useful for me to know that the person who's asking to connect with me has a reason for it. They don't even have to know me. They just have to have a sufficiently compelling reason to connect with me. Another tip here is that the rule about whether or not you want to accept a connection request or how large a network you want to create on LinkedIn is not a rule at all. It's entirely subjective. It should be a reflection of who you are, just like your LinkedIn profile should be a reflection of who you are the same way a resume is. This is how you represent yourself online. And I am a hyper networker. That's why people joke that I was jaked in. I add everybody. I've got way too many connections on LinkedIn. That's just who I am, both in real life and online. If that's who you want to be, accept all the connection requests you get. On the other hand, a lot of people use this as a much more selective Rolodex. It's just the people they work with on a regular basis or they're particularly closely connected to. That's totally acceptable as well. Now I'm going to go through the actual profile and talk about sort of which sections are important for you. Unfortunately, we live in a world where photos are still the most important thing on a profile. And I say that's unfortunate because I've been an advocate of skills-based hiring for a long time. A ton of discrimination happens because of photos, and a ton of discrimination happens because of names. And so I wish we had a world in which LinkedIn didn't have either of those things. It had some form of unique identifier. But unfortunately, these days, the first thing somebody looks at is the photo. So definitely have a professional photo here. And put a title photo here as well. It'll just keep the person's attention for longer. And that's a rule that I'll get back to later because anywhere there's multimedia content is where people's eyes are going to go and where they're going to stay. Next, people look at your title. And actually, the term for this, I'm forgetting exactly what it is, but it's headline. This is your headline as opposed to your title. Your title goes down here above an actual job, right? This is my title at LinkedIn. My headline says something unique about me. And so a lot of people just copy and paste their title here. Instead, take advantage of this space to describe yourself in a way that is unique and compelling. Some people add like parent and dog lover and whatever. It's entirely up to you. Keep it relatively professional, but you can personalize it like that in order, again, to get to distinguish yourself from sort of the crowd of other people who have the same title. Next, this summary section for me is way too long. So there's going to be a bunch of examples here where I say, don't use me as a model. Rather, find somebody who you respect and who has a relatively complete LinkedIn profile and model yours based on theirs. Find somebody whose presence on LinkedIn you are impressed by, right? The persona that they have is one that you want to be aligned with or you want to use as a model, and then literally model yours on theirs. In general, have a couple paragraphs here, not the 5 or 6 that I have, and The important part is use words that a machine is going to search for, that a recruiter programs when they're looking for somebody for the jobs that you want to get. So in other words, we would often say use keywords, not catchwords, i.e. the words that somebody's literally going to put into a recruiting engine if they wanted to find a lawyer working in intellectual property law would probably relate to copyrights, trademarks, etc. Have those words in the summary, and it will elevate your profile when it's being put through the automated engines that LinkedIn sells to recruiters around the world. In this featured section, I would highly recommend having multimedia content. This is where just the pictures and videos that I'm linking to keep the person's attention for longer. If it's not there, they're just going to see a huge block of text and keep scrolling. Maybe I'll pause on the activity section to talk about posts. So there's two ways to post on LinkedIn. One is sort of the short form tweet length posts. I would do those relatively regularly if you do want to keep an engaged audience. And then there's longer form articles. And both of them actually boost your rank. Having both boosts your rank on LinkedIn. I'm explaining ways of sort of gaming our system. These are all ways, of course, to keep you engaged on the platform. I'm not necessarily advocating for them ethically. Rather, I'm trying to say that these are the ways that are going to keep your profile highest on LinkedIn if this is how you want to get a job. And I'm trying to pay attention to the chat as we go. So for instance, please do keep asking questions relevant to what I'm talking about. I love the sufficient and compelling reason. Sounds like constitutional law comment by Abby. And Abby's also asking about the distinction between keywords and catchwords. So there's actually another way that LinkedIn makes that distinction, but all I'm trying to say is don't use words that are very common. So exciting or compelling. Jake is a quick learn. That doesn't tell me anything about a specific skill that I have. Rather, if I say Jake has experience litigating patents, that is like hyper specific, right? You get litigation, check, and intellectual property law through patent, check. So hopefully that helps. Happy to jump into it more later. I'm gonna keep going and then I'll come back to the questions, but please do keep them coming. So I talked a bit about activity. The more you interact on this platform, the higher your profile's ranked. If you're liking other people's posts, if you're commenting on them, a comment is worth more than a like, a post is worth more than either, et cetera, et cetera. On experience, this is where I would be very, very thorough. Particularly in law, I remember taking my like 12-page academic CV and compressing it down to a 1 or for some law firms or 2 for other law firms page resume. And on LinkedIn, you want it to look much more like the academic CV. Everything that you've ever done should be on here. Why? Because it's automatically compressed, right? So right now, I'm not sure if it'll happen right now, but yeah, show 5 more experiences. It's only showing a certain number and I can choose which ones it shows at the top. In fact, by clicking on this, I can drag this around and put them in whatever order I want. So they don't even have to be chronological. And that's exactly what I've done. I put the ones that are most important, not just from a temporal perspective, a time perspective, but also in terms of who I want to be represented as at the top. And then I've dropped down, Lighthouse, where I'm based, is another important one for me. International Council on Badges and Credentials, very important. I was for many years associated with this law firm, but I didn't do a lot of work for them. So to be frank, it was ranked lower. I was a lecturer at McMaster. It came after, in terms of my identity, these other 2 things, et cetera, et cetera. For those that you do want people to know more about, definitely put a description in here. Again, 1 paragraph is fine. You don't need all this. And make sure that you're actually associating yourself with the right company. Often we should be auto-completing the organization that you work for, and hopefully the organization that you work for or have in the past has any form of LinkedIn page. If they do, it will auto-populate the logo here. Once it does, you've picked the right organization. Definitely complete your education, any certifications, literally like volunteering work, throw up here, because what people don't realize is a recruiter or a hiring manager will notice that I play ultimate frisbee, and all of a sudden be attracted to your profile because of that. They'll notice that I'm a dog lover and they're a dog lover, and therefore they'll spend more time on your profile. It's those really personalized distinctions that are important for you to highlight or distinguish your profile from others. As I said, I've got lots of volunteer experience on here because that's a really important person of who I am, a part of who I am. Yep.
Hi, Jake. Hi. I just now I saw you have a license and certifications. I heard there's a term called micro credential. It's quite hot recently, right?
Exactly. And this is an area that I'm quite passionate about, as you know. If we jump further up, you can see one of the organizations that I was involved in founding was called the International Council on Badges and Credentials, which is all about micro certifications. And in fact, as you said, if we go down here, this is the certification that I've received.
And yeah, we do actually provide a great certification at LexisNexis. So students are welcome to take our Lex Can Learn certification. That's available. It's free and highly recommended. So we can drop that into the chat as well. So thank you for bringing that up.
All right. So back to LinkedIn tips. Let's see if I keep scrolling down past volunteer experience, skills and endorsements. This is again a key section. And the reason this is essential is because the skills that are listed here are the skills that a search engine or that a recruiting platform will automatically pull out and associate you with. So I would take a few minutes to fill in the skills. Endorsements, less important. I don't think employers give them a ton of credibility depending on the industry, but they certainly don't hurt. And if you don't have any, then your profile doesn't look as good as those who have them. So if possible, get a former manager, get a former colleague or fellow law student to give you some endorsements associated with the right skills.
Jake, can I stop you with one question
Please.
here? It kind of feeds into, I see Hannah in the chat has asked something that makes me nervous about networking in general is that my boss is watching. So perhaps even if you're online and you're updating your profile suddenly, it's like, what's this person trying to do? So I think it's kind of those two may go hand in hand. So is there anything that you can suggest to help navigate this concern, or have you heard of this before?
Yeah, a couple things. One, a ton of people use LinkedIn for their day jobs, not just for finding a new job. In fact, I think at this point, the majority of people on our platform are using LinkedIn and have jobs and have jobs they're not eager to leave. And so I think that the key is to make it clear to your boss and to have a positive enough relationship with your boss that they realize that you have a LinkedIn profile because you're proud of where you currently work, and navigating the sort of tightrope walk of how to create a profile that's sufficiently appealing for a new employer, particularly if they're in a different industry, while also not making it absolutely clear to your current employer that you're looking to leave, is challenging, but I don't think it's any more challenging than having those same conversations in the office. And so instead, the key is create a profile as if it was for your current job, but which will look appealing for other employers. And when you do things like on LinkedIn, and when you turn on the I am interested in work function, there's multiple ways of doing it. There's almost always a way to say, I'm available for new opportunities, but I don't want my company to see that. And you'll actually see when you turn that option on, that ability. On the other hand, we very recently created these badges that you may have seen on people's profile images, where it literally puts a little sticker on the image saying open to being hired. That you probably wouldn't want to do under the circumstances you just described. So I think I'm pretty well done. I'm going to probably leave it in terms of the recommendations on the LinkedIn here. I have lots more, so I'm happy to talk about them. But I figure for now, I'll stop sharing and turn it over to sort of questions from the audience more generally.
Okay, we have one here. So Allison's asking, how diverse should my post be? I feel like I only post about my education and law related topics. Is this okay? Great question.
Yeah, totally fine. It is a fantastic question. And I think that when I was in law school, I was probably doing the exact same thing, just posting on things related to law because I thought I'd go into law and that would be sort of the be all and end all of my life. Since then, I've expanded to the point where these days, I'm on boards that relate to documentary theater, and I am an artist, and I'm also an employee at LinkedIn. And so my posts relate to all of those things and many, many more. Frequently, I have a friend say, hey, can you help share this opportunity for me? I share it, and it doesn't necessarily relate to any of the things that I do on a day-to-day basis. the complete picture of all of those posts is actually the representation that I want the world to have of me, or the image of me that I think that I want others to have. And I would post with the same intention in mind.
So I can jump to another question that was emailed in earlier. I think this is a great one. So this person said, I'm a mature student and I took some time off to go traveling. I would like to know what I can do about this gap in my resume and career experience.
Fantastic question. And it's a question I get a lot because I'm working with disadvantaged populations all the time. So my favorite example actually comes from the world of newcomers. You know, I've sponsored a few refugee families. My parents did before us. And in fact, my mother was a refugee when she came to Canada. And in all of those cases, individuals had exactly what you're describing: blocks in their life when they were doing things that wouldn't be described as a job. And yet you are almost certainly learning, sometimes much more during those periods than you would on a job. So talking about the skills that you've acquired during that time is really important, and explaining what you were doing during that time. If, for instance, you were taking care of children, that requires a fair bit of project management and time management and juggling, and maybe pedagogy, teaching, or family or communication skills, etc. So including that description on there is actually, in my opinion, really positive. And if you're proud of the time you spent, let's say as a refugee, shepherding, not proud might not be the right term, but if you were able to shepherd a family across multiple borders, that again took resilience, project management, persistence, etc. And describing that process, even on LinkedIn, probably is vulnerable and may reveal things that you're worried about, but also will probably appeal to many employers who are specifically looking to hire newcomers in one case or parents in another.
Awesome.
Cheers.
Great. Okay, I see some really good ones coming in. So first we can maybe go into, can you expand more on how to reach out to lawyers or individuals that you want to connect with on LinkedIn? And what's a good first type message that you would recommend?
So I'm just going to parrot it back to you to make sure I got it right. How would I, if I were to reach out to either a lawyer or a recruiter, how would I frame the message?
Yeah, on LinkedIn, if it was a message on LinkedIn. I know you mentioned before with Faye, it would be, hey, we connected, but perhaps in this situation you haven't met before and you want
Correct. So yeah, often you don't immediately go to connect with the person. Unless you plan on having or want, for whatever reason, an ongoing relationship with them, often somebody will start with a message. And if you're not connected to them and you don't have LinkedIn Premium, then I believe you need to use what's called an in-mail. Everybody gets a certain number of in-mail credits, and those can be sent to anybody on the platform, not just people you're already connected to. And so you could use an in-mail, and I would, in all communications related to talking to somebody new, start with why it is that you're communicating with them, right? My name is X. I'm reaching out for this reason, and that reason should have a benefit to them, right? If they're going to maybe hire you, that's obviously a benefit to them. If you're going to talk to them about something that's interesting to them, but actually will result in potential job opportunities for you, make clear that interesting thing that you're going to talk to them about, or the value that you're going to bring to the conversation. And then thank them. I have sort of a favorite template that I use, and this is less so for in-mail requests or in-mail messages, I should say, because they often have to be quite short. But certainly when I want to follow up, so for instance, when I am eventually connected to the person that I want to get, the lawyer that I want to get a job with, and I'm having a conversation with them, but I in particular want to have a longer, let's say, Zoom chat with them, what I would do is I would send them a message saying, this is why I want to talk to you. If not, no problem. Is there anybody else related to these subjects I can talk to? If not, no problem. Thanks for getting this far. And that way you're not putting pressure on them, but you are giving them the opportunity to help you irrespective. And that same template is often used. I use it all the time for introductions. So I leave a half-hour coffee chat, which in my opinion is the best way to network and get a job, is just have as many coffee chats with people in the areas you're interested in as possible, and ensure that in those chats, you're creating space both to give them value, but also for them to recommend other people for you to talk to about the same subject. And as soon as they do, you write those down, and afterwards you send them an email saying, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me. here's the folks you said you'd introduce me to. If you're open to it, I've drafted the introduction for you. I'm making it super easy for you to make the introduction. Just copy, paste, edit, send. And if not, no problem. Thanks for getting this far in my email or in-mail or message on LinkedIn.
Great. That's really good.
Cheers.
Okay, so we have another one here. So what are the best ways to use groups such as university alumni to increase your connections?
Good question. It's a particularly good question because I think groups are underused. And some of that is on LinkedIn because we've changed how groups work a few times. And I think that dropped our usage and now it's coming back up again. But when I say they're underused, I mean specifically for the purpose you asked. They are an amazing way of breaking into new industries and of networking. Why? Because the folks who are in a group are specifically there to do exactly that, to network with other people in their industry and to have conversations about a subject that likely relates to work. And so you can, if you are adding value to that group, if you are able to link to articles that are of interest or show the work that you've done that's relevant, or even offer to help with things that other people are asking for help with, that's exactly the kind of networking that will result in job opportunities.
Okay, so this next one we have says, it can be exhausting as young people to stay on top of so many social media networks daily. So what strategies do you suggest to prioritize publishing LinkedIn content without exceeding one's capacity to be online all the time?
Great question.
I think it starts with following LexisNexis on
on LinkedIn. There you go. Thank you. So follow LexisNexis on LinkedIn. Is that it?
Yeah.
And also, but I agree with that statement to the extent that follow the things that are going to add value as opposed to the things that get your attention first, right? So unfortunately, we've learned that social media in general is all about getting our attention, right? So many of the tips that I gave on how to complete your profile were like where to keep somebody engaged. And the result is that we often are paying attention or even posting things because of this feedback loop rather than because of the inherent value in the subject or or the time that I'm putting into it. So I guess my answer is I feel your pain. I am constantly overwhelmed with trying to manage LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, email, Slack, Teams, et cetera, et cetera. But practically speaking, I would try to focus your time and attention on the areas, again, that both will result in value for you, now maybe in terms of a job search, and will contribute to a community meaningfully, as opposed to making a splash and getting attention.
Okay.
Cheers.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about our actual profile photo, but do you recommend that the background photo on LinkedIn be professional or have some type of specific message?
Definitely no specific message. Yes, professional. Don't have something obscene or childish, but professional can vary a fair bit. I mean, there are dog walkers on LinkedIn and they can have pictures of their puppies on there. If you're not a dog walker, it might not be appropriate to have your background be a picture of your puppy. But maybe it is. The classic example that I used to give when I was in sales solutions, again, making recommendations to people professionally for what their profile should look like, was if you're not selling fish, don't have a picture of you holding a fish. And it is shocking how many people have photos of them holding fish on their LinkedIn pages. On the other hand, maybe that hobby is such an important part of your life that you want to feature it. If so, no problem. You'll probably attract other people who are similarly interested in fishing, which could actually benefit your career.
Great. Okay, so then this one is, what do you think of privacy settings on LinkedIn? Are there benefits to having them on or off?
Again, a completely personal question. It's entirely up to your personal preferences in terms of how much of you that you want to be public. I, for instance, am an extremely public person, as you can probably tell. And so I tend to control how people perceive me on the internet by just flooding it with the ways that I want them to perceive me. Others limit it, right? They only show very specific things, and that's the image they want to convey. Both are completely acceptable. There are some advantages, for instance, to having the ability for others to see your profile turned on. The last time I checked, you could only turn that on and off when you are a premium member. Otherwise, I think it defaults to being on. But irrespective, I would recommend under most circumstances leaving it on because, for instance, if you're looking at firms' pages and you're interested in working at those firms, they will see that you're looking at their pages. The recruiters will see that you've been on their page, and could prompt them to reach out to you, even if you haven't reached out to them. So in many, many circumstances, it is beneficial to leave as much of the privacy settings open as possible, but it is entirely a matter of personal preference. And I would definitely not recommend that you ever sort of change your personal or moral outlook on privacy based on the norms on LinkedIn.
All right, so this one says, if you send a message to someone on LinkedIn asking them to connect and they give you their email, you send them an email, but you don't hear back from them, what's the next thing to do? And I think this is probably common with our students reaching out to people, especially during this time, trying to get interviews. Yeah, how would you follow?
I don't think it's different on LinkedIn than any other means. One thing that I found shocking and maybe a little tragic about advertising is the fourth email. If you're running a campaign where you send many, many emails to get somebody's attention, the fourth email is the one that they're most likely to respond to. I'm not sure where that stat comes from, but I have heard it repeated enough times that I believe it. It actually has sort of proven true in my sales career. I hate being the person to send the fourth email, but it would suggest that sending more than one is a good idea. And maybe I'll leave it at that because I think it's personal beyond that.
Okay, this one I really like. So we have, you spoke about leaving space in coffee chats to create value. How would I, as a young student, create value for, say, an established senior partner at a law firm who practices in an area that I'm interested in? Any suggestions?
Great question. I'm almost certain you know something about a niche area of that area of law, or something that is more applicable to your age category or your time in your career or your gender or your demographics. You know more about that than they do about that specific area. So I would be shocked if there was ever a time when a partner knew absolutely everything about that area of law. And even if they did in terms of the black letter law, most of law is actually how it's being applied to the real world. And so your perception of the real world is going to be different than theirs. And if you can leverage that to add value to the conversation, to contribute something that they didn't know about how that law is applied to you or your life or your history, then I think that in and of itself will be valuable. Also, a lot of the conversations, like most of the conversations I think we have with folks, aren't on the core subject in the title of the meeting. So as an example, what worked, I got really lucky when I was applying for law school, when I was going through the OCI process, which I think a lot of you all are doing today. The key for me was other things that I had in common with the partners that I was interviewing with. So for instance, I sat down and I think in at least two of the partners' offices, there was a book that I had helped the author, it was Margaret Macmillan wrote this famous book called Paris 1919. So at this point, it was on a lot of people's bookshelves. I had helped her with her next book and therefore could pick up in conversation. I think in one case, the lawyer saw it on my CV, and in another case, I saw the book and just started talking about it. But it's that kind of pretense where you're having a conversation that isn't directly on the subject of the meeting that creates the feeling of connection with the other person, which they will likely leave remembering much more than you being a particular expert on that area of law.
So,
cheers.
Okay. So next we have LinkedIn. Are you guys providing any specific support for job searching during the pandemic?
We are, lots. And this is a passion area for me because this is specifically what I'm spending a lot of my time on. Maybe actually I'll turn screen sharing on for a second and pull up a site that we just created for people who are looking for skills adjacent roles. And that's sort of a complicated idea, and it's particularly complicated, I think, for folks in law because folks in law are so used to sort of going down a narrow path. But if I pull up, let's see if I can find it quickly. Here we go. So we just launched this in the past couple months. And there's a few things that are important here. One, if you look, so if we scroll down, I'm going to skip ahead, but it actually explains really clearly how this process works, how our labor market information works, and what a skills adjacency is. I'm not going to get into that right now. Instead, I'm going to put in Toronto here. And when it says enter a job, this is like any job that you had before. So I'm actually curious if for those folks who want to leave law already, let's put law student. Sure, there we go. So these are jobs that are adjacent to law student. Ironically, we categorize law student as a job, which I guess in some ways it is. And so these are other positions that have a skills overlap with being a law student. Legal counsel, barrister, legal assistant, attorney, law clerk. I'm just trying to think of something that's like out there. Anyways, let's use legal researcher. So for instance, some of the skills that you might not have as a law student, but that you would need as a legal researcher include dispute resolution. And if I click on this, it's actually going to take me to the LinkedIn Learning course that is on dispute resolution. Once I log in, of course. And many times. I might not go through this whole process because I work for LinkedIn, so it's hyper secure. I'm going to try one more thing
as well, and I can circulate that out.
Yeah, totally. Let's do that. That's a better idea. And then if I get back here, so these are other LinkedIn Learning courses that relate to it. These are jobs in Toronto with this title. And these are other people that I'm connected to who are in that job. And so it helps you both with the networking aspect, with the jobs aspect, and with the skills aspect of finding skills adjacent jobs. The last thing I'll show you is, if we go to resources, there is a job seeker curriculum that we've created, and we've also made free the learning paths to our top 10 job posts. So I'll send Claudia the links to those afterwards, and we can distribute them to everybody.
Wonderful. Great.
Cheers.
So we have time for a couple more questions. We can get through these. So we have one that talks about this person's a quiet and private person. They don't really want to include a lot of their details and information on the platform. I guess maybe some ways on how they can still stand out, or maybe what's the bare minimum that you need to put on your profile?
That's a great question, because I think it, at least half the population is probably in that boat. And the key is, if you are willing to put your information on a resume that you're going to hand to somebody, you should probably be equally willing to put it on a LinkedIn profile. Certainly that's sufficiently locked down from a privacy question to that earlier question, from a privacy perspective, I should say, that that only people who you give permission to see it can see it. So you can really lock your profile down to the point where no picture, bare minimum information is revealed to others. And then once you accept their connection request, then they can see more. That's one way that I would do it. I would say the minimum requirements are the information that you think will be sufficiently compelling for an employer to hire you. And I know that's a bit of an evasive answer, but I literally mean, what's going to show the potential employer that you have the skills that they are looking for in a candidate. And I would at least have that conveyed through a few roles, volunteering positions, education, etc. But you can try to keep anything that's sort of personally identifying off of it. I do think we require a real name. And as I said, not having a photo, unfortunately, almost always disadvantages you. But that is really unfortunate, and it's possible. Ideally, you'd find an employer that doesn't need a photo, because, in my opinion, that's a more ethical employer.
Great. Okay. And is it bad to look at someone's profile too many times, like a lawyer or someone that you want to contact, but you never reach out?
I don't think it's bad, but I do think it's obvious. So if you're paying for premium, you can turn off the ability for them to see your profile. If not, and you actually really want to work for that law firm, then don't hesitate. They'll just know it. As an example, I think if I remember correctly, I got some negative feedback in my first interview at Gilbreth's, the law firm I ended up working at, and went home with a colleague from law school who was also applying at the same law firm, and we both completely redid our CVs based on that feedback. So like the night after our interview, we redid our CVs and sent them back to the firm. That is sort of a loose equivalent of being on their LinkedIn page over and over and over and over again, right? Because we really wanted to work for this firm. So we just customized our CV specifically for that firm, and we got the job. And so I think in many cases, that kind of eagerness will actually do you well.
Great. Okay. So I think now we're at the point where we have one last question to close everything off. So this is a really good one, and I think just kind of high level, you can wrap up everything that you talked about into this. So it's, how would you recommend leveraging LinkedIn to show our best selves in a virtual environment and in a way that's most likely to land us the job that we want?
That is a very broad question.
Yeah. So I guess
so
takeaways for
yeah,
us.
I'll summarize exactly some takeaways. So the broad ones are, I think you should represent yourself online the way that you'd represent yourself in person. You should expect that people are going to be looking at LinkedIn, even in law, when they're interviewing you. If you want your profile to be elevated, you need to be engaging a lot on LinkedIn in terms of search results that recruiters use. So the tools that automatically comb through profiles look for things like keywords, whereas when a person is looking at a profile, their eyes tend to rest on multimedia content. Therefore, ensure you have both keywords and multimedia content, and again, engage as much as you can to get your profile up there, particularly when you're interviewing. I think that's probably a good start, and always customize your connection requests. Awesome.
All right.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences, the amazing tips, so many creative new ways for us to use LinkedIn as a resource. And I know I learned a lot, and I think I can speak for everyone here that I'm sure they did too. And we all have some homework to do and some immediate takeaways to update our profile. So thank you so much for everything and sharing that.
Pleasure.